Hello and namaste to the AMA podcast. And today we are going to explore a topic that is DIB, diversity, inclusion, and belonging, the power of DIB in business. And today we have two great industry experts with us, Ms. Priyanka Agarwal and Ms. Jayati Doshi. Ms. Priyanka has an experience of 25 years in corporate world, while Ms. Jayati has been working with many international organizations and is a culture consultant. Welcome, ma'am. So, my very first question would be why DIB, diversity, inclusion, and belonging in business, is necessary?
Thank you, Himani, for having us on your podcast and for considering this topic important enough for a discussion. I think if you look at what's happening world over, there is a very, very strong linkage of how inclusion of diverse people, or rather the exclusion of diverse people, has a massive profit and loss impact. And if I told you that when there are culture issues in an organization, it actually reduces profit, reduces sales, impacts your brand, you will have people taking note of this far more seriously. So our objective is to start sensitizing Indian corporates, because I think 10 years ago, we didn't realize we'd be the third largest ecosystem in the world, big in startups. So we are now large global players. So you have to make sure that we are updated on some of those softer aspects of culture, where we think of culture as good to have, right? It's not required for a business to have culture. What businesses need to understand that culture has a very strong correlation with business itself. And India, with its diversity, I mean, to give you a small example, is maybe 30 years ago, and you're very young, so 30 years ago, I'm sure you went around. Beauty, for example, men's grooming products and men looking after themselves, they would have instantly been labeled something bad, right? A man, doing makeup or taking care of himself was unheard of. But today, the power of diversity is that the whole thing about men's grooming industry has been normalized. So therefore, it's important to start talking about inclusion of diversity as a strategic business lever and not simply as an HR function.
So, truly, ma'am, I agree to that we need to adapt changes which is happening. So, my second question would be what critical elements of DIB is that organizations kind of overlook to it?
I think very often, and we keep saying this, I'm going to take what she said, right? You can have the best strategy in the world. If your people are not aligned to it, if your processes are not aligned to it, if the way that your organization functions on the ground are not aligned to it, your best strategies are going to fail. And I think a lot of companies overlook that, right? Your strategy is being taken care of one person, your culture is being taken care of one person, your managers are detached from both those things. It doesn't work like that unless all of that ties together and working together towards business success. It's not going to work. And I think that ignorance of culture, right? And I don't think anybody wants to not pay attention to it, but looking at culture is often felt as inconvenient because you try to do it as an extra intervention. But it needs to be a part of your everyday working, right? Like the way that you're everyday thinking of business success, you think of culture like that and include it. So your processes, your everything from how your meetings are happening, how are people talking to each other, are they respecting each other? These are little ways that companies can build cultures that include people. That is not an extra intervention. So then it becomes an investment that you get returns on, and it's not an extra cost that the company has to bear, where you're taking employees out, you're teaching them 15 दिन बाद भूल जा रहा है. That doesn't lead to anything, the surface interventions.
True. So, how important it is for the leaders to take part in this inclusion and diversity, and how can they make sure that everyone is included in it?
Okay, I'm going to take this because I think having worked for 25 years in corporate, so I don't talk to you from an academia point of view. I've been an intern in a Big Four. So I did my CA at KPMG. I have worked for 25 years in the corporate sector, in sales, BD, whatever role you talk about is leaders can no longer delegate culture. You delegate this to human resources, and leaders need to actually handle culture on their own, and it has to start with safe workplaces. Like, you're looking at what's happening in the world. You look at RG Kaur. You look at what's happening in the Kerala film industry, it's everywhere. So start with creating safe workplaces for everyone. And we're extremely lucky that we have laws that are mandatory. So you anyway have to comply with certain mandatory laws. You'd rather do it with the intention of creating safety, because that for me is where we are lacking big time in India, is our workplaces need to be safe. Because if you don't have safe workplaces, your current employees feel excluded or feel unsafe, so they are not productive. If they are not productive, forget innovation, they can't do the jobs that they are hired for. So Himani, inclusion really, you can't talk about inclusion unless I feel safe with you, right? If you don't feel safe with me, I mean, I could be asking all the right questions, I could be buying you coffee and cake, but you will still not open up to me. So leaders need to really first create a culture of safety. And it's safety, whether it's well-being, whether it's mental safety, whether it's, physical safety, safety from harassment, all of it. And I think the most important thing I'll tell leaders, immediate thing is stop calling your people resources. I am not iron ore or bauxite or some precious metal or chemical. I am a person. So start bringing that person first culture into the organization and look after culture the way you look after a profit and loss account or balance sheet. Very important.
And I think just to add to that, like, honestly, leaders decide if this is easy or hard in an organization, right? If the leaders say this matters to us,
Yeah.
the organization figures out a way to make it happen. That's what strategy is, right? You figure out how to make something happen. So the leaders need to say, I care about this, our organization cares about this, this is a part of what we're trying to do and what's important to us in order for our business success, right? Not without that. But the minute the leader says that, the rest of the organization figures out a way to include it in their DNA.
Agreed. Actually, leaders play a very vital role in forming of an organization. So, the following that, so how do you think the approach of diversity and inclusion has changed in over the years, past few years?
I can answer that, but it will not go down very well with most people in the country. So I think what's happening is that we are way behind as far as inclusion of diversity is concerned. We are only stuck on gender. The whole inclusion agenda is centered around either women or LGBT or people with disabilities. It's extremely important. These groups are very, very important because they are underrepresented in the workplace, right? Now, an underrepresented talent market means an underperforming company. As simple as that. So we are, I think, way behind and we are trying to build a building. You catch up. Is I am last in the race, but I want to come first. That can't happen by jumping over 9 people, right? You can't do a flying jump. You have to build it. So the important thing is to very quickly first get culture and people into the strategy, into the CEO conversation, leadership conversation, and first focus on creating a foundation for inclusion of diversity instead of trying to, let's hire diverse people. And then what happens is if your people don't feel included, diverse people are definitely not going to feel included, and you have a bunch of people just leaving and nothing happens. So therefore, the focus really for India is first change your awareness about inclusion. Diversity is not just women. Diversity is not just people with disabilities or people who come from a different gender, sexuality. Diversity is everything. And your organization has to reflect the market you're working in. Now, we don't operate in a, outer space ship as a company. We operate in society. True. Therefore, you have to start looking at diversity in its total sum. And start with your own people. I mean, your current people form part of that diversity. So, start by asking them what's missing in the organization. And I'm telling you, safety is a huge issue in the country at the moment.
Very true, ma'am. Since you have mentioned about culture, our culture structure is very complex and the mindsets are very rigid. So how can the organization overcome that mindset or the structure that is already been working for a very long time?
When you begin to look at it, like she said, it's a business issue, right? You get your numbers, you look at the right metrics, you'll see the problems for yourself, and numbers is often a good enough starting point for you to begin looking at that. And when you do that, it's also important to not just take a checklist and say, here are all the best practices in the world. What? Look at what works for your organization, what is not working. Get an outside view, get someone who can see it in that objective way and who can see it in the complexity, right? Because it's not just one or two incidents, it's how all of that is coming together. Identify the right point, and then the resistance, the subtle resistance under all of this is leaders don't want to give up their power.
Yeah.
Or people who are upholding the older systems don't want to give up their power. So it needs to be dealt with strategically to say, आपका pie बढ़ेगा, right? Don't think of it कि जो pie है, that is getting divided. Pie बढ़ेगा if everyone's performing and everyone benefits from it. So to reframe the conversation in intelligent ways that doesn't threaten someone, but makes everyone feel like this is good for everyone. The current systems don't work for anyone. Just because we figured out how to work in it doesn't mean they're working.
Yeah.
And if you look at the numbers, you can see that.
Yeah.
So for us to see that and then work towards it strategically, that gets everyone on board instead of making anyone the villain.
So if you're looking for a formula, Himani, I think first of all, you can't do inclusion if you're excluding people, right? So the minute you say, I am going to try and include more women in the workforce, instantly people who are in the organization feel, oh ho, ab hamara kya hoga? So you've got to talk about inclusion. The definition of inclusion is so simple, include everyone. And I think culture problems, first you need awareness. If I am not aware, for example, that I have, say, diabetes, okay, first is I need to become aware that I have diabetes. That is step one. Two is I have to acknowledge that I have diabetes and it's a problem. I'm talking about a very simple example that anyone watching the podcast can understand. Awareness of the problem, acknowledgement of the problem, and then you take action. Without this process, right, we are right now in denial stage. Ki hum fifth largest economy ban gaye. We are doing fabulously well, but what we don't realize is, if you look at the other numbers, our GDP per capita is languishing. We are what, 134, 130, 134, around that number. Our inclusion of women in the workforce is 140. Gender pay parity, we are 200 years away. So I think that reality check needs to come really from the government also, to say we are celebrating fifth largest economy in the world, but unless every one of us improves our standard of life, what is the fun in growth? So growth has to benefit all, and inclusion or diversity, when done right, actually has that benefit.
Agreed. Actually, awareness is what is required in the people. So, could you share example where the inclusion of diversity and inclusion has led the positive results in the business?
So, see, I can tell you, as a woman in the workforce, I had to leave when I had my first child. She's 18 now. Today, as a woman in the workforce, I can tell you a lot of adjustments, accommodations are being made for you to come into the workforce. I wish that schools and colleges started talking to young women who want to be professionals like yourself on what does it take to break some of the mindsets that you've grown up with, right? That superwoman, this thing of your career is as important as anybody else's. Some of those discussions need to start as part of education and curriculum. Sure. I think inclusion of diversity needs to be taught right from grade 8. Because it's not really something which is social good. It is required for you to succeed in any place you work at. So this has to be taught as a skill. I think we work with the National Commission for Women on Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act awareness. So we do work with them. I can see some effort on trying to create that foundation, right? Workplace safety, and you're seeing how it's playing out. We've had multiple incidents in our country and it's become like a revolution. Toxic workplaces is becoming a talking point of late. But what is required is seriousness right from the top. Unfortunately, India में ना जब तक डंडा नहीं पड़ता ना, काम नहीं होता. I'm sorry, that's the way it is. So I think it's both. There's a push factor. You need push from the government to get inclusion of diversity right, and you need to pull companies and leaders to say, this is so important, the benefits are massive, the cost is too much for you to handle if it goes wrong, so do it now. That's the...
Yeah, and I think the other, so I'll give you one example, but I'll also give you the other thing is there's so many are getting wrong
Yeah.
that it's hard. I can give you more examples of tokenism and that going wrong than this thing, but there are small efforts that are being happening. But my favorite example of diversity having a huge advantage is what it's done to the edtech sector. Right? Today, if you look at universal design for learning, or if you look at making learning accessible to different kinds of learners, it benefits not just someone who has a learning disability, but it benefits because people learn differently. So you're including all different kinds of learners and improving learning, and as a result, the edtech platforms that are getting that right, are actually serving to a lot more customers. And I think for me, that's a great example of it's a win-win for business, it's a win-win for learners, and it allows inclusion and accessibility to happen. So we need to stop seeing it as a formality.
Yeah.
You change it, it's a really exciting, innovative way to look at businesses.
Agreed, ma'am. Actually, it's important to change the mindset, adapt the changes, and learn new things when the things are coming to us. Thank you very much, ma'am, for sharing such great insights. And I hope companies understand the importance of DIB and how can it lead to a positive work environment for all the organizations and business world. Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you.